Alistair left everything to me. Seraphina's perfect composure slipped for the first time as she sat in Luatsu Jonathan Price's office the day after the funeral. I watched her face cycle through a dizzying array of emotions. First, smug, assured satisfaction, then confusion, and finally, thinly veiled, incandescent outrage as Jonathan continued reading the will's precise, legalistic provisions. Not exactly, Seraphina, Jonathan corrected, his professional tone remaining perfectly level. Mr. Alistair Reed left you the beachfront condominium property, his investment portfolio with Meridian Global, and a life insurance policy totaling $500,000. I sat quietly, hands clasped tightly in my lap, observing the scene like a detached academic. While the total inheritance for Seraphina was substantial by most standards, nearly $1 million in total assets, it clearly, catastrophically fell short of her meticulously constructed expectations. The family home at 1742 Oakwood Drive, both vehicles and his personal primary bank account at First National are bequeathed to his mother, Dr. Evelyn Reed, Jonathan continued, reading directly from the legally executed document, careful not to meet either of our eyes. That's absolutely impossible, Seraphina interrupted, her carefully manicured nails digging deep into the leather armrests of her chair. We purchased that house together. It's our marital property. Jonathan calmly slid a document across the massive oak desk. The house was purchased solely in Alistair's name before your marriage, Seraphina. It was never converted to joint property. The deed and mortgage documents confirm this legal fact. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, despite the inner turmoil and profound shock. Alistair had never breathed a word of these arrangements to me. The sprawling, beautiful colonial home, the one with 4 bedrooms and the sprawling backyard where Rhys had his treehouse, was apparently mine, not Seraphina's. So were Alistair's luxury sedan and the utility vehicle, along with a significant bank account I hadn't even known existed. The depth of Alistair's foresight was beginning to dawn on me, a painful, bittersweet revelation. What about Rhys's college fund? Seraphina demanded, her voice rising sharply, betraying her practiced composure. Alistair always said he was setting aside money for Rhys's education and future. Jonathan nodded slowly. Mr. Reed established a comprehensive educational trust for Rhys's future expenses. However, you are not named the trustee of this account, Seraphina. Then who is? Seraphina's question came out as a nearly audible hiss. Jonathan glanced briefly, pointedly, at me. Dr. Evelyn Reed has been named the sole trustee of all funds related to Rhys's care, education, and long-term well-being. The room fell into a heavy, crushing silence as Seraphina struggled to process this devastating information. I could almost visualize the rapid, frantic calculations happening behind her eyes, totaling assets, weighing her diminished options, frantically formulating her next strategy. This makes absolutely no sense, she finally said, her voice deliberately modulated to convey wounded confusion, rather than the raw, bubbling anger I could now vividly perceive beneath her thin veneer. Alistair and I discussed our estate plans in depth. This is nothing like what we agreed upon over the years. Jonathan cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. The will was comprehensively updated just 4 months ago, Seraphina. Alistair came to me specifically to make these definitive changes. Everything is legally executed, witnessed, and notarized. 4 months ago? Seraphina's eyes instantly narrowed to slits of pure suspicion. He never mentioned any changes to me. That was his legal prerogative, Seraphina, Jonathan replied simply, cutting off any further protest. I remained strategically silent, absorbing the profound implications of what I was hearing. 4 months ago, Alistair had secretly, meticulously revised his will to ensure I would possess the family home and control the financial resources, while simultaneously limiting Seraphina's access to the most vital assets. The timing corresponded precisely with a period when Alistair had seemed particularly troubled, often bringing Rhys to stay with me for what he termed father-son weekends, which I now suspected were actually meant to give Alistair the necessary space to deal with their increasingly toxic marital issues and quietly prepare his escape plan. There must be some egregious mistake, Seraphina insisted, turning her full attention on me with a practiced, wounded look of appeal. "Eve, you know Alistair would have wanted his family to remain in their home. You have your own perfectly lovely house. Surely you don't intend to take ours away from Rhys." The insidious manipulation was a textbook maneuver, framing any enforcement of Alistair's final wishes as me cruelly taking something away from my grieving grandson, rather than taking it from her. I recognized the tactic instantly, but chose not to confront her directly. "I am as surprised as you are, Seraphina," I said, speaking a profound truth. "I need significant time to process the sheer weight of all this new information." Jonathan continued with the additional, minor details, personal effects, specific bequests to charities, funeral expenses that had been prearranged and prepaid. Throughout the rest of the meeting, I observed Seraphina frantically texting under the table, her face a rigid mask of appropriate, yet utterly hollow, grief occasionally disrupted by rapid, calculating flashes of avarice. When the meeting concluded, Jonathan asked me to remain behind for a crucial moment. Once Seraphina had left with a tight-lipped, venomous promise to talk soon, directed pointedly at me, he closed his heavy office door and sat directly across from me. "There is more, Eve," he said quietly, his voice now stripped of its professional detachment. "Alistair left this for you, with explicit instructions to give it to you privately, only after the initial reading of the will." He handed me a large, sealed manila envelope with my full name written across it in my son's intensely familiar handwriting. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably as I took it. I gestured toward the envelope. "Take it home, Eve," Jonathan advised softly. "Read it only when you are completely alone and ready. And Eleanor," he added, his demeanor softening with profound sympathy. Alistair knew exactly what he was doing. "Trust that." I nodded, slipping the envelope deep into my purse as I rose to leave. In the lobby, I found Seraphina engaged in an intense, hushed phone conversation, her back turned strategically to the receptionist's desk. I paused just out of her line of sight, but well within earshot. "Completely blindsided me," she was hissing, her voice low but vibrating with unbridled fury. "The house, the cars, even access to Rhys's education fund. No, I do not think he suspected anything. It must have been his manipulative mother's influence. Of course I am going to fight it, Thierry. I have put in 10 years with this family. I deserve far more than some shabby vacation property and an insurance payout." I retreated silently, choosing the back stairs instead of waiting for the elevator where Seraphina might see me. My mind was racing with frantic questions, but one thing was becoming crystal clear, solidified by her own words. Alistair had anticipated something I was only just beginning to truly comprehend. Back in the sanctuary of my own modest home, with Rhys still safely at school, I finally, gingerly opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single heavy page of stationery from Alistair's law office. "Mom, if you are reading this, the unthinkable, the final thing, has happened. I am so sorry to leave you with this terrifying burden, but there is no one else in this world I trust more implicitly. My marriage has been failing for some time. What began as simply growing apart has catastrophically evolved into something much darker and more concerning. I have discovered certain things about Seraphina that make me genuinely fear for Rhys's future emotional well-being, and frankly, for your own long-term financial security. I have arranged things precisely this way to protect both of you. The house, the cars, the money, they are not truly for you. They are tools to ensure Rhys has one stable, loving, moral parent figure left in his life when I am gone. Seraphina will fight this decision tooth and nail. She will try to manipulate you using every trick she possesses. Do not let her know what you know or what you suspect. Watch and wait. Document every single thing regarding Rhys's care. Jonathan has the rest of my detailed instructions and the body of evidence I have meticulously gathered. He will help you when the time is precisely right. I love you, Mom. You taught me to see people clearly, to plan ahead, and to trust my instincts. I am counting on those same profound qualities now to protect my son, Alistair. I pressed the letter against my chest, fresh, agonizing tears spilling down my cheeks. Even when faced with his own mortality, Alistair had been thinking only of protecting his son and me. Now my mission was crystalline, stark, and terrifyingly clear. For my son's sake and for Rhys's entire future, I would need to become something I had never been before. A relentless, strategic opponent in what was clearly going to become a vicious battle of wills and insidious manipulation with Seraphina. It was time to put my lifetime's knowledge of psychology and human frailty to its most important, most personal use. Yet, Alistair's will reveals shocking arrangements that leave Seraphina furious and me utterly stunned. Why did my son secretly transfer so many vital assets to my name? His private, posthumous letter confirms my worst suspicions about Seraphina and gives me a sacred, chilling mission. Protect Rhys at all costs. But to truly outsmart my calculating daughter-in-law, I'll need to meticulously hide what I know and patiently play a much longer, more dangerous game than she could ever anticipate. Grandma, when is Daddy coming back? Rhys's innocent, devastating question over breakfast 3 days after the funeral pierced my heart like shrapnel. At 8 years old, he was old enough to grasp the abstract concept of death, but still young enough to harbor the painful, impossible hope for miraculous reversal. "Oh, sweetheart," I said gently, setting down my coffee cup and carefully taking his small, warm hand in mine. "Remember what we talked about? Daddy can't physically come back. His body stopped working because of the terrible aneurysm in his brain." Rhys nodded slowly, eyes downcast, tracing the rim of his plate with his index finger. "I know, but sometimes I forget when I first wake up. I keep thinking he'll come and make his special banana pancakes like on Saturdays." I swallowed hard past the thick lump forming in my throat. "I know it's incredibly hard, my love. I miss him too, every single minute. Would you like me to try making my own version of pancakes on Saturdays now?" "They wouldn't be the same," he mumbled honestly, then quickly added, "But I'd like that anyway." Grandma Eve. I was temporarily staying at Alistair's house, my house now, according to the legal documentation, to help care for Rhys while Seraphina ostensibly dealt with important paperwork, as she vaguely explained. In reality, I strongly suspected she was meeting with her own high-powered attorney to viciously contest Alistair's meticulously crafted will, but I kept this thought securely locked within the confines of my own mind. After dropping Rhys safely at school, where his compassionate teacher had been wonderfully supportive, I returned to the house to find Seraphina waiting for me in the kitchen. She had let herself in using her key, dressed in a sleek, expensive black pantsuit that conveyed a jarring sense of businesslike mourning. "Evelyn," she greeted me with a brief, cold kiss on the cheek that utterly failed to reach her eyes. "I'm glad you're here. We need to have a serious talk about arrangements going forward." "Of course. Dear," I replied, maintaining the polite, somewhat deferential demeanor I had consciously decided to adopt as the core of my defensive strategy. "Would you like some coffee?" She seated herself regally at the kitchen island, watching me move around what was now, technically, my kitchen. This is all so overwhelmingly stressful. The paperwork, the accounts, the sudden, terrible decisions. "I can only imagine, dear," I murmured sympathetically, diligently playing my role while vividly remembering the viciously angry phone conversation I had overheard. "How can I possibly help ease your burden?" Seraphina's perfectly made-up face registered a brief flicker of surprise at my remarkably accommodating tone, quickly replaced by a calculated, forced warmth. "You are so incredibly kind, Evelyn. Actually, I've been thinking very carefully about what makes the most profound sense for everyone involved, especially for Rhys. Here it comes, I thought, keeping my expression entirely open and receptive. This house holds so many powerful memories of Alistair," she continued, her voice taking on a practiced, artificial tremor. "Every single room reminds Rhys of what he has so tragically lost. It might be psychologically healthier for him, for both of us really, to make a clean, fresh start somewhere else." I nodded thoughtfully while placing a steaming mug of black coffee before her. "You're considering moving, Seraphina?" I found a lovely, airy condominium downtown, near the cultural district. Excellent private schools nearby, within walking distance to the art museum and the library. She stirred her coffee deliberately, meticulously, The thing is, Evelyn, with the complicated way Alistair arranged things, I'll absolutely need your cooperation. Oh? I tilted my head questioningly, feigning utter ignorance, as if I hadn't already anticipated this exact conversation down to the last syllable. The will situation is obviously some kind of dreadful mistake or profound misunderstanding. Alistair would never have intentionally put me in such a financially difficult position. Her tone hardened slightly before she expertly caught herself. I've spoken with an extremely aggressive attorney who suggests we could avoid lengthy, destructive legal proceedings if you would simply agree to transfer the house back to me, as Alistair would have wanted. I'm certain. I widened my eyes slightly, projecting deep, thoughtful consideration rather than the fierce, righteous indignation I felt at her brazen attempt to manipulate me using my own dead son's supposed wishes. I see, I said slowly. And what does your attorney say about the irrefutable fact that Alistair updated his will only 4 months ago specifically to make these definitive arrangements, Seraphina? A swift flash of profound irritation crossed her face, quickly replaced by her mask of reasonable, grieving mother. Alistair wasn't himself in those recent months. He was working too hard, terribly stressed about his cases. He wasn't thinking clearly about his family's best interests or our long-term stability. I nodded slowly, as if genuinely considering this flimsy explanation. That must have been incredibly difficult for you both to endure. It was, she sighed dramatically, leaning back. Which is precisely why I believe he would want us to correct this dreadful oversight now. For Rhys's sake. The invocation of Rhys's welfare, her emotional trump card, was deployed exactly when and how I had predicted. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, giving myself vital time to carefully formulate my strategic response. I do understand your concern, dear, I said finally. But making hasty, emotionally charged decisions during intense grief is almost never wise. Perhaps we should both give ourselves a little more time to adjust to our new reality before making such major, life-altering changes. Seraphina's perfect smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course you need time, Evelyn, but the beautiful condo I found won't be available for long. It would be so much easier for Rhys if we could settle things quickly and let him start healing in a new, neutral environment. I instantly recognized the classic sales tactic. Creating artificial urgency to force a quick, panicked decision. My 30 years teaching negotiation strategies to psychology students had not been wasted. Why don't we ask Rhys how he feels about the prospect of moving? I suggested mildly. He might actually find profound comfort in staying in the familiar home where he has so many precious memories of his father. Children don't always know what's truly best for them. Seraphina countered smoothly, instantly rejecting the idea. That's why responsible adults make these difficult decisions. Besides, he's already dealing with enough emotional turmoil. I noted how skillfully she had positioned herself as the protective, rational parent while subtly suggesting I would harm Rhys by consulting him about his own profound feelings. Alistair's letter seemed to rustle in my memory. She'll try to manipulate you. You're probably right, dear, I conceded, watching profound relief flash across her features. Let me think about it all very carefully for a few days. This has been such a terrible shock for me, too. Of course, she agreed, clearly believing she had made significant progress. Take the weekend. But Evelyn, she added, her voice dropping to a low, confidential, conspiratorial tone, I'm genuinely worried about finances with the way things currently stand. Alistair handled absolutely everything, and now I'm finding huge credit card bills. The mortgage, which was now legally my sole responsibility, according to the will. But I kept this crucial observation to myself. I'd be happy to help you review the household accounts, Seraphina, I offered immediately, seizing the opportunity to gain further access to her financial information. Perhaps we could go through everything together? That's absolutely not necessary, she said quickly, dismissing the offer. I just meant that resolving the house situation would help me quickly access the equity we've built. For Rhys's education and overall well-being. The education fund that Alistair had specifically placed under my control as trustee, I thought bitterly. I wondered if she realized how transparent her motivations were to someone rigorously trained to observe and analyze human behavior. "Let's talk more next week, then," I suggested, rising as if our conversation had utterly reassured rather than profoundly alarmed me. I should get some rest before picking up Rhys from school. After Seraphina left, I sat alone in the quiet house, mentally reviewing every single detail of our interaction. She clearly believed I was a grief-stricken, somewhat passive older woman who could be easily maneuvered into surrendering what Alistair had so painstakingly entrusted to me. For now, I needed her to continue believing exactly that. I picked up my phone and immediately called Luatsu Jonathan Price. "I need to understand precisely what evidence Alistair collected, Jonathan," I told him without preamble, "and how we can begin to gather more, immediately." This is going to be a much longer, more difficult game than I initially anticipated. Seraphina wastes no time trying to manipulate me into signing over the house. Using Rhys's welfare as emotional leverage, I play the role of a compliant, grief-addled mother-in-law, appearing to carefully consider her mercenary proposal while secretly planning my precise, strategic counteroffensive. Alistair warned me she would fight dirty, but he didn't realize his mother was ready to fight much, much smarter. The performance has begun, and I fully intend to be the better, more convincing actor in this dangerous production. "Grandma, Mom says I have to go with her to Miami next weekend, but I really don't want to." Rhys's troubled little face looked up at me as I tucked him into bed, precisely 1 week after Alistair's funeral. This was the absolute first I had heard of any Miami trip, which instantly raised a cacophony of red flags in my professional mind. "Miami?" I kept my voice consciously casual, the picture of an interested, gentle grandmother while my mind raced frantically. "That sounds like quite an adventure, sweetheart." Rhys shook his head emphatically, clutching his stuffed dinosaur tighter against his small chest. "She says her friend Thierry has a big boat and will stay at a really fancy hotel. But I have my big science project due next Monday, and Daddy always helped me with my projects." I smoothed his soft hair gently. "Have you told your mom about the science project, my love? She said I can just skip it. The teachers always understand when your dad dies." His voice caught heartbreakingly on the word. "But Daddy wouldn't want me to skip it, Grandma. He always said commitments are important." "Your father was absolutely right about that, my dear," I agreed, making a cold, clinical mental note of this entire conversation. "Let me talk to your mom tomorrow. Maybe we can work something out that satisfies everyone." After Rhys finally fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, I immediately called Luatsu Jonathan Price at the private home number he had provided for urgent matters. "Miami?" Jonathan's voice sharpened instantly when I explained the sudden, unexpected situation. "With Thierry Dubois? You know him?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "He's the real estate developer I mentioned in our meeting yesterday, the one Alistair had serious professional concerns about." Jonathan's tone was now carefully measured and deeply serious. "Eve, did you install the complete home monitoring system I recommended?" "Yes, the technician finished today. Cameras in the common areas, and the complete security system that sends all alerts directly to my phone." I had followed Jonathan's advice to improve home security, though the underlying, true purpose was vastly different than what a grieving family might normally install. Good. That crucial recording capability may prove absolutely invaluable later. He paused. "I'm sending you some comprehensive materials from Alistair's private file tomorrow by express courier. Do not open the package where anyone, especially Seraphina, might see you." The next morning, after dutifully taking Rhys to school, I received a large sealed manila envelope. Inside were printouts of a vast collection of text messages between Seraphina and someone saved in her phone simply as TD, Thierry Dubois, dated from various points over the past 8 months. Alistair had apparently gained deep, stealthy access to her phone records through means I chose not to question, given his formidable legal background and paranoia. The messages painted a truly damning picture. An intense, long-running affair that had begun almost a year ago. Plans made and abruptly broken. Vicious complaints about Alistair working late. about being trapped in her dead, suffocating marriage, and multiple chilling references to Rhys simply as the complication in their relationship plans. Most disturbing were the recent exchanges from just 2 months ago. TD, how long are we going to keep this disgusting limbo going? You said you were ready to leave. Seraphina, patience, my love. Al's name is on absolutely everything important. We need to get the financials in a much better position first. Working on it. TD, the island property isn't going to wait forever, darling. Perfect opportunity for a clean, fresh start. Seraphina, trust me. Few more months, max. Everything will fall into our perfect plan. I sat back heavily, my hands shaking uncontrollably. These were not just messages documenting a banal, sad affair. They explicitly revealed Seraphina had been actively planning to leave Alistair, but ruthlessly wanted to secure a maximum of financial assets first. Had Alistair discovered this devastating plan, and was his sudden death truly an accident? I pushed the terrifying thought away, focusing on the tactical evidence. When Seraphina returned home that afternoon, I confronted her with a carefully composed, gentle facade. I heard you're planning a trip to Miami next weekend, dear. That sounds lovely. But Rhys is very worried about his science project. It's a mandatory healing trip, Evelyn, she replied dismissively, pulling out her travel bag. He can get an extension. I'll write a note explaining that grief takes priority. But Rhys is upset about missing the deadline, I pressed mildly. He's struggling with the concept of commitment right now, Seraphina. She finally looked up, her eyes flashing cold irritation. He's being a typical dramatic child. I am his mother, and I decide what is best for his emotional state. Besides, I need this time away too. It's crucial for my mental health. I noted the absolute priority, her needs, her lover, her trip. Rhys was merely luggage. I called Jonathan again. She's taking Rhys to Miami with Thierry Dubois. I need every single detail of this trip documented, Jonathan, meticulously. Already on it, Eve, Jonathan assured me instantly. I've engaged the same discreet high-level investigator Alistair used. We'll have time-stamped photographs of everything. The boat, the hotel, who Rhys is left with. Miami is actually incredibly helpful for our purposes. It shows her true priorities in stark, undeniable relief. And if Rhys is upset by the trip? I couldn't keep the sharp worry from my voice. Document his emotional state immediately when he returns. Have him talk to his counselor about the disruption. Every single reaction becomes a piece of crucial evidence. I hated viewing my grandson's emotional pain through the cold, transactional lens of evidence, but I now understood the agonizing necessity. Building a formidable legal case for Rhys's best interest meant carefully cataloging everything that threatened his well-being. As I prepared for a solitary weekend in Alistair's house, my house, I thought about the elaborate theatrical production unfolding around us all. Seraphina playing the devastated, overwhelmed widow while ruthlessly planning her escape with her lover. Me playing the supportive, somewhat naive mother-in-law while diligently gathering ammunition. Even Rhys unconsciously providing crucial insights through his innocent, heartbroken comments. The only person not performing was Alistair, whose profound, agonizing absence remained the most powerful presence in our entire lives. I touched the framed photo of him on the mantel. I'm watching, Alistair, I whispered, tears welling up. Just like you asked me to. And I'm learning far more than Seraphina could ever realize. Disturbing evidence reveals Seraphina has been planning her escape for months, viewing Rhys as a mere complication in her intense affair with Thierry Dubois. As she whisks my grandson off to Miami with her lover, I maintain my performance as the supportive mother-in-law while meticulously documenting every single poor parenting decision. Alistair had begun building a comprehensive case before his tragic death. Now I'm continuing his crucial work, gathering the undeniable evidence that will eventually protect Rhys from a mother who sees him only as an unfortunate afterthought in her grand new life plans. Rhys returned from Miami exactly as I had feared, with severely sunburned shoulders, a persistent stomachache from consuming far too much ice cream, and a profound, heartbreaking emotional withdrawal. He trudged into the house late Sunday evening, hours later than Seraphina had promised to bring him back, his small face tight with utter exhaustion. "How was your trip, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling immediately to his level, offering a warm hug, as Seraphina texted rapidly and oblivious on her smartphone behind him. Rhys shrugged listlessly, eyes downcast. "The boat made me really sick, Grandma." "He's being dramatic," Seraphina interjected instantly, without even looking up from her screen. "It was just a little motion sickness. The resort was 5-star. The weather was perfect. He had a wonderful time." Rhys's defeated expression told a profoundly different story, but he remained silent, casting a quick, fearful glance at his mother before mumbling, "Can I just go to my room, please?" "Of course, my love," I said gently. "I'll bring up some ginger tea for your tummy in a few minutes." As he slowly trudged up the stairs, I noticed he wasn't carrying his usual school backpack. "Did Rhys forget his school bag, dear?" I asked, turning to Seraphina. She waved her hand dismissively. "It got wet on the boat. Nothing important in it." "His science project materials were in that bag, Seraphina," I pointed out, carefully keeping any accusation out of my meticulously controlled tone. "He can get an extension," she stated with cold finality. "I'll write the note. I'm sure the school will understand." She finally looked up from her phone, her expression daring me to issue a challenge. "Thierry sends his warmest regards. By the way," she said, a hint of brazen triumph in her smile, "he was disappointed you couldn't join us." The utterly shameless mention of her lover made my stomach clench with profound revulsion, but I maintained my perfect facade of oblivious politeness. "How thoughtful. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed your weekend." "Very much, thank you," she replied, her smile widening. "Thierry has wonderful connections in Miami. We're actively considering significant investment opportunities there." "How nice," I murmured, making another immediate, cold mental note of this casual admission of future, shared plans. I should check on Rhys now. Upstairs, I found my grandson sitting silently on his bed, staring intensely at a framed photo of Alistair on his nightstand. The room was exactly as he had left it Friday. Homework still spread untroubled across his desk, work he clearly hadn't touched all weekend. "Want to tell me about the trip, sweetheart?" I asked gently, sitting carefully beside him. His lower lip began to tremble visibly. "Mom was on her phone almost the whole time, Grandma. She and Thierry talked about really boring grown-up stuff and left me with the hotel babysitter, even at night." My heart sank instantly. "The whole night, my love?" He nodded miserably. "2 nights. The babysitter fell asleep watching the TV, and I got really scared because I didn't know where I was when I woke up. I called Mom's room, but she never answered the phone." I kept my expression utterly neutral, while inwardly seething with protective rage. "That must have been terribly frightening for you. Rhys, we will definitely be discussing this with your counselor. Thierry has a really big boat, but he wouldn't let me touch anything," Rhys continued, picking nervously at a loose thread on his comforter. He said, "Kids mess things up." And Mom laughed when he said that. Even though Daddy always let me help steer our little boat. Each heart-wrenching detail was another crucial piece of evidence. Another painful example of Seraphina ruthlessly prioritizing her illicit new relationship over her son's most fundamental emotional needs. I made careful mental notes to record later in the detailed journal Jonathan had urgently suggested I keep. "Did you tell Mom you were scared or upset, Rhys?" I asked softly. Rhys shook his head decisively. "No, she was having so much fun. She told me in the car that it's really important for her to be happy again, and I shouldn't make things harder for her by complaining." The chilling manipulation of making an 8-year-old child responsible for his mother's happiness, especially one profoundly grieving his father, sent a surge of protective hot anger through me. I consciously pushed it back down, focusing instead on providing immediate, unwavering comfort. "It's absolutely okay to have big feelings about things, my love," I told him, pulling him gently against my side. "Even when grown-ups are having fun, your feelings matter more than anything." He leaned into me, his small body finally relaxing slightly against mine. Daddy always asked about my feelings. He whispered, "I know, sweetheart. I know." After settling Rhys with the ginger tea for his stomach and helping him salvage what minimal materials we could for his science project, I documented the evening's devastating revelations in my meticulous journal, adding them to the rapidly growing catalog of concerning damning behaviors. Jonathan had explained that establishing clear, unwavering patterns was absolutely crucial. Any single incident could potentially be explained away, but consistent, documented patterns of neglect, poor judgment, and indifference would successfully build our case. Over the next 2 weeks, those destructive patterns emerged with a terrifying, disturbing clarity. Seraphina began staying out late without any explanation, leaving Rhys with me more and more frequently. She completely missed his scheduled school conference, sending me in her place with a vague, dismissive excuse about estate meetings. She completely forgot to refill his asthma medication, necessitating a panicked emergency pharmacy run when he had a mild attack during soccer practice. Each incident was meticulously, precisely documented in my journal. Each one showed a mother who was increasingly detached from her son's daily, crucial needs. While I consciously stepped in to fill the overwhelming void, I was careful never to criticize Seraphina directly to Rhys, focusing instead on providing the absolute stability, routine, and attention he so desperately craved. The advanced security system I had installed captured further. Telling moments. Seraphina bringing Thierry to the house late one evening, both slightly intoxicated, entirely unaware that Rhys was awake and witnessed their intimate behavior in the kitchen. Seraphina instructing Rhys to remember to tell Grandma you had a great time today, after a rushed outing where she had spent most of the time on loud business calls. Multiple documented instances of her promising Rhys she would attend his activities, then cruelly canceling at the very last minute. My performance as the supportive, somewhat naive, complacent mother-in-law continued throughout. I offered to help with Rhys's care in ways that seemed generous rather than deeply strategic. I expressed immediate false understanding when Seraphina claimed grief brain for her increasingly frequent forgotten commitments. I consciously avoided confrontation when she made thinly veiled, aggressive comments about needing to move forward with selling the house. "Evelyn, we urgently need to discuss the house situation," she said one evening, precisely 3 weeks after Alistair's death. She had arrived unexpectedly while I was helping Rhys with his homework, dressed for what was clearly an expensive dinner date rather than a mother-son evening. "Of course, dear," I replied amiably, not looking up from Rhys's geometry textbook. "I've been meaning to ask what specific items you'd like to keep when I move in permanently next month." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows instantly arched in profound, visible surprise. "Move in? I thought we had agreed the house absolutely needed to be sold." "Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that at all, Seraphina," I said mildly. "Actually, I've been thinking it's definitively best for Rhys to maintain this current stability right now. His therapist specifically mentioned how critically important familiar environments are during the intense grief process." Her expression hardened momentarily before she forced a concerned, professional smile. "I'm genuinely worried about you, Evelyn. This massive house is far too large for you to manage all alone. And the sheer financial burden of the mortgage, utilities, maintenance?" "Alistair left the house free and clear," I mentioned casually, watching her profound, devastating reaction. "No mortgage to worry about at all, and I'm much more capable than I look. All those years managing a university psychology department taught me quite a bit about handling complex, long-term responsibilities." Something shifted fundamentally in her assessment of me. A rapid, involuntary recalculation that I could almost visually track behind her eyes. I had revealed myself as slightly more formidable, less pliable than she had dangerously assumed, yet I still meticulously maintained my helpful, utterly non-threatening demeanor. "We'll discuss it more later," she said finally, looking flustered. "I urgently need to run. Important dinner meeting. Rhys has already had dinner, and he should be in bed by 9 o'clock. After she abruptly left, I sat with Rhys at the kitchen table, helping him rebuild the simple science project whose materials had been carelessly lost in Miami. As he carefully glued tiny pieces of his solar system model together, he looked up suddenly. "Grandma, are you really going to live here now instead of Mom?" The direct, devastating question caught me completely off guard. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, focusing intently on positioning Mars at the correct distance from his styrofoam sun. "Mom told someone on the phone that you're trying to take the house from her. She said you were being selfish and mean. I chose my words with exquisite care. Your dad wanted to make sure we all had safe, stable places to live, my love. Sometimes grown-ups simply disagree about the specific details. I want you to stay here," he said simply, looking up with big, earnest eyes. "You help me with my homework and you remember my medicine and you make real food instead of just ordering pizza all the time." His straightforward, innocent yet profoundly perceptive assessment of the situation powerfully reinforced my core determination. This wasn't just about honoring Alistair's final wishes anymore. It was about protecting a vulnerable child who clearly recognized, even at 8 years old, the profound difference between performative parenting and genuine, consistent care. "I'll do my very best to stay close no matter what happens," I promised him, pulling him into a tight hug. It was the only promise I could make with absolute certainty, while the larger, deadly battle continued to unfold around us. The aftermath of the Miami trip reveals disturbing patterns in Seraphina's parenting as she increasingly neglects Rhys for her relationship with Thierry. I carefully document each instance while maintaining my supportive facade. Rhys's innocent, devastating observations confirm what I already know. Seraphina sees him only as an unfortunate inconvenience in her ruthless new life plans. The house becomes our first battlefield. But the true war is really about something infinitely more precious. A vulnerable boy who desperately deserves better than a mother who remembers him only when it serves her cold. Self-centered purposes. I'm thinking of taking Rhys to my parents in Arizona for a few weeks. Seraphina's announcement over morning coffee, nearly 4 weeks after Alistair's death, seemed casual, but the timing set off immediate, screaming alarm bells in my mind. I had just informed her that Luatsu Jonathan Price urgently needed to meet with us again regarding additional estate matters. "Arizona," I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral while stirring my coffee. "That's quite a distance, dear. What about Rhys's school schedule?" Seraphina waved her hand dismissively, the expensive watch on her wrist flashing. "He can miss a few weeks." Children are resilient. Alistair's own favorite phrase, "children are resilient," sounded utterly hollow coming from her lips. A convenient, cynical excuse rather than a thoughtful observation. "When were you thinking of going exactly?" I asked, mentally calculating how this sudden trip might align with the increasingly urgent, cryptic timeline Jonathan had mentioned. "Next week, ideally." She checked her watch again. "My parents have been absolutely begging to see him, and frankly, I could desperately use the support system. Being a sudden single mother is just so overwhelming." I consciously bit back the observation that she had been essentially a single mother by choice for months. Given how often she delegated Rhys's essential care to Alistair and me, even long before the affair began, "That's certainly understandable," I said instead, playing the supportive role. Though I do wonder if such a big, disruptive trip might be difficult for Rhys right now. He's just getting back into his consistent school routine, and his grief counselor specifically mentioned how crucial consistency is for his current development. Her eyes narrowed slightly, instantly detecting my subtle resistance. "Are you suggesting I don't know what's best for my own son, Evelyn?" "Not at all, dear." I quickly backpedaled, meticulously maintaining my non-threatening persona. "Just thinking aloud about the logistics. I'm absolutely certain you've considered everything very carefully." "I have," she said firmly. Her tone then softened, becoming almost conspiratorial, dangerously smooth. "Actually, Evelyn, I desperately wanted to discuss something extremely important with you. Could we have dinner tonight? Just the two of us? I'll have my assistant watch Rhys." I raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Your assistant, dear?" "Thierry's assistant," she corrected smoothly. "Melissa is wonderful with children. She's helped with Rhys before many times." Another crucial detail for my journal, I thought instantly. Seraphina was leaving Rhys with her lover's personal assistant rather than his own grandmother, who lived a mere 15 minutes away. I made a solemn mental note to immediately ask Rhys about these previous undocumented occasions. "I'd be happy to watch him, Seraphina," I offered. "But dinner sounds absolutely lovely. What exactly did you want to discuss?" "Everything," she said vaguely, sweeping her hand through the air. "The house, Rhys's future, how we move forward from this tragedy. I think I've finally come up with a mutually beneficial solution that works perfectly for everyone." Her confident, almost arrogant smile suggested she believed she had formulated an utterly irresistible proposal. I agreed to meet her at an upscale downtown restaurant at 7 o'clock, genuinely curious about the new strategy she had devised. The restaurant she had chosen was deliberately, ostentatiously impressive, the kind of place with minimalist decor, microscopically tiny portions, and prices that made you gasp. Seraphina was already seated when I arrived, looking breathtakingly elegant in a designer dress that somehow managed to suggest tasteful mourning while remaining fiercely fashionable. "Evelyn, thank you so much for coming." She greeted me with an air kiss to the cheek. "I ordered us a bottle of Dom Perignon. Alistair always said it was your absolute favorite. It absolutely was not. Alistair knew perfectly well I preferred a simple Chardonnay, but the manufactured intimacy was clearly a crucial part of her performance." "How thoughtful, dear," I murmured, settling into my chair. She poured the expensive champagne anyway, immediately raising her glass in a toast to new beginnings and permanent solutions. I sipped politely, patiently waiting as she meticulously established the precise atmosphere she wanted: convivial, generous, warmly intimate. The manipulation was textbook in its execution. Create a pleasing environment, establish false rapport, suggest shared understanding before finally making the pitch. "Evelyn," she began, after our appetizers arrived, "these past weeks have been so incredibly difficult for all of us. Losing Alistair, trying to help Rhys cope with his grief, dealing with all the dreadful practical matters." I nodded encouragingly, diligently playing my role. "I've been thinking deeply about what truly matters in life," she continued, her voice adopting a practiced, chilling sincerity. "Family, financial security, peace of mind. And I honestly think I've found a way for all of us to have exactly what we need." "I'm listening very closely, dear," I said, cutting a small, expensive piece of my overpriced scallop. "You and I both know Alistair's will has created unnecessary complications." She delicately sipped her champagne. "The house, the vehicles, the accounts. It's all rather awkward, isn't it? Not at all what Alistair would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly and rationally." I remained silently receptive, letting her continue her meticulously rehearsed pitch uninterrupted. "I've spoken with an excellent estate attorney who specializes in these hostile, contested situations. He firmly believes we could easily contest the entire will based on Alistair's mental state in those final months, the extreme stress he was under, the heavy medications for his previously undisclosed heart condition. It wouldn't be difficult at all to legally demonstrate diminished capacity." My heart clenched with profound moral indignation at how casually she suggested utterly invalidating my son's final, protective wishes, but I kept my expression flawlessly neutral. "I see," I said simply. "But litigation is so unpleasant, destructive, and public," she continued smoothly. "It creates terrible permanent divisions and drags on for months or even years. Not what Rhys needs right now. At all." "Absolutely not, dear," I agreed, wondering precisely where this chilling performance was finally heading. She leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering her voice to a whisper. "So, I've come up with a much better, simpler solution, one that gives us both exactly what we want, without any messy public legal battles." "And what exactly would that be, Seraphina?" I asked, genuinely curious about the depth of her mercenary strategy. "You transfer the house and the vehicles back to me as Alistair's widow," she explained, as if offering me a tremendous undeserved favor. Seraphina's announcement of a sudden mandatory trip to Arizona sets off alarms, coinciding with Jonathan's warning about additional estate matters. I agree to her dinner invitation, recognizing it as a trap. Over an expensive theatrical meal, she reveals the true, cold calculus of her mind. Her plan to invalidate Alistair's will based on a claim of diminished capacity, and her better solution. She is about to offer me a devil's bargain, attempting to coerce me into relinquishing everything Alistair left me. The dinner of deception has reached its inevitable mercenary climax. In exchange, Seraphina continued, her voice dropping to a low conspiratorial purr, I'll guarantee you can see Rhys regularly. Perhaps every other weekend, the major holidays. I'll even put it all in writing, legally binding. The breathtaking, stunning audacity of her offer, essentially ransoming my own grandson, utilizing him as a bartering chip, almost made me lose my meticulously maintained composure. She was proposing that I surrender everything Alistair had legally left me in exchange for mere permission to see Rhys, rights I already legally held as his grandmother. That is quite a proposition. Seraphina, I managed, taking a deliberately slow sip of the champagne to mask the profound, protective revulsion on my face. I know, it's so generous, she agreed instantly, completely misinterpreting my hesitation as genuine consideration. Most women in my position would ruthlessly fight for absolutely everything. But I genuinely value your relationship with Rhys. And frankly, she sighed dramatically, dropping the pretense slightly, I could certainly use the help occasionally. Occasionally, I echoed, picking up instantly on the telling, self-centered word choice. Well, single motherhood is incredibly demanding, she sighed again, even more dramatically. And I do have my vital career to consider. Plus, Thierry and I. She stopped herself abruptly, expertly recalibrating the narrative. That is, I'll eventually want to rebuild my personal social life. Having guaranteed flexible childcare arrangements would be tremendously helpful for my schedule. There it was, stripped bare, the true cold motivation. Not Rhys's long-term psychological well-being, but convenient free childcare arrangements that would ruthlessly allow her to pursue her relationship with Thierry, completely unencumbered. What about Rhys's trust fund? I asked innocently, testing her boundaries further. Would that essential fund remain exactly as Alistair meticulously arranged it? A sharp flash of professional irritation crossed her features, before she forced the radiant smile back into place. That's unnecessarily complicated too, Evelyn. As his legal mother, I should have full direct control over his educational expenses and funds. Children's needs change constantly, requiring absolute flexibility. You know, they certainly do, I agreed, my mind instantly flashing to all the ways Rhys's actual needs had been callously ignored in the preceding weeks. So, she said, triumphantly reaching into her expensive purse and withdrawing a folded legal document, I took the liberty of having my aggressive attorney draft a simple, clean agreement. You transfer the assets back where they legally belong. I guarantee your visitation rights. Clean, simple, everyone wins. She slid the paper across the table with the arrogant, unshakable confidence of someone who truly believed they held all the power. I took the document, my eyes quickly scanning the cold, legalistic language that would effectively and completely undo everything Alistair had painstakingly arranged to protect Rhys and me. This is quite thorough, Seraphina, I commented, desperately buying time while carefully formulating my devastating final response. And what about Arizona? Would Rhys and I still be able to have our guaranteed visits if you decide to move permanently? About that, she said, her expression instantly turning regretful. The Arizona trip might quickly become more permanent. Thierry has massive development opportunities there. And there are truly excellent private schools for Rhys. It would be a clean, fresh start for everyone. And conveniently hundreds of miles away from me and anyone else who knew Alistair, or might dare to question her abysmal parenting, I silently concluded. The pieces of her cold, mercenary plan were falling perfectly into place for my psychological understanding. I'll need to think about this proposal very carefully, I said, folding the document and placing it securely into my own purse, and perhaps have Jonathan review it, since he is intimately familiar with Alistair's final wishes. Her smile tightened instantly, the the true Seraphina breaking through. I wouldn't involve Jonathan, Evelyn. He's rather old-fashioned and overly emotional about these matters. My attorney assures me this simple agreement is completely standard and boilerplate. I nodded thoughtfully. Even so, Seraphina, such an important, life-altering decision deserves careful, professional consideration. Alistair always taught me never to sign anything without proper, independent legal review. She couldn't possibly argue against invoking my dead son's wise advice without seeming openly disrespectful and guilty, so she merely smiled weakly and signaled impatiently for the check. Of course. Take a few days, Evelyn. But, Evelyn, she added, her voice dropping, taking on a subtle, unmistakable edge of threat. This really is the absolute best, fastest solution for everyone. Fighting me on this decision would only hurt Rhys in the long run, and you know that. The thinly veiled, menacing threat hung heavily between us as she paid for our extremely expensive meal with what I suspected was one of Alistair's credit cards. I maintained my mask of thoughtful consideration, thanking her politely for dinner and promising to give her utterly mercenary proposal the precise attention it deserved. As I drove home, my hands finally allowed themselves to shake uncontrollably on the steering wheel. The sheer audacity, the cold manipulation, the casual, sickening way she planned to separate Rhys from his remaining connection to his father, it all confirmed every single thing I'd been painstakingly documenting for weeks. I immediately called Jonathan from my car. She's planning to take Rhys to Arizona. Permanently, I said without preamble, my voice barely steady. And she's offered me a devil's bargain to get the house and the accounts back. Perfect, Jonathan replied, his response surprising and steadying me. This is exactly what we needed. Bring the document to my office first thing tomorrow morning. It's time to move to the next, final phase. Over an expensive theatrical dinner, Seraphina reveals her true chilling colors, offering me a devil's bargain. Surrender everything Alistair left me in exchange for mere permission to see my own grandson. Her concrete plan to move Rhys to Arizona with her lover, Thierry, shows how completely she intends to erase Alistair from their lives. Little does she know, her transparent, narcissistic manipulation has handed us exactly the final, damning piece of evidence we urgently needed. Jonathan's cryptic response suggests the endgame is about to begin, and Seraphina has no idea the legal storm that is coming for her. She actually put it in writing. I can hardly believe the sheer audacity. Luatsu Jonathan Price shook his head slowly in professional amazement as he reviewed the document Seraphina had given me. We sat in his vast, silent office early the next morning, our coffee quickly growing cold as we meticulously dissected her mercenary proposition. This is essentially a cold, hard confession, he continued, highlighting critical sections with a bright yellow marker. She's explicitly stating she'll only allow you to see Rhys, your own grandson, if you illegally transfer massive assets to her that are now legally yours. That, Eve, is textbook coercion. And this part about Arizona, I pointed to the vague, legalistic clause mentioning reasonable visitation regardless of primary resident location, establishes undeniable premeditation for ruthlessly removing Rhys from his entire support system and familiar, stable environment during a critical period of intense grief. Jonathan added another bold yellow highlight, his jaw tight with resolve. Combined with the devastating evidence we've already gathered of her appalling parenting patterns, this single document creates a compelling, indisputable legal narrative. I leaned back slowly in my chair, processing the enormous, terrifying implications. So, Jonathan, what happens now? What is the next final move? Jonathan carefully set down his marker, his expression turning intensely serious. It's time to execute the contingency plan Alistair put in place. He desperately hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but he prepared for this exact, final scenario. From his locked desk drawer, Jonathan withdrew a sealed, heavy envelope marked Emergency Protocol in Alistair's familiar, distinct handwriting. My heart constricted instantly at the sight of my son's familiar, resolute script. Alistair left detailed, precise instructions about when and how to proceed if Seraphina's behavior, unequivocally threatened Rhys's well-being or if she attempted to permanently separate him from you. Jonathan opened the envelope slowly, carefully. The key component, Eve, is a petition for emergency custody modification. Custody modification? I repeated, utterly stunned by the sheer enormity of the term. Alistair wanted me to seek custody of Rhys. Temporary custody initially, Eve, Jonathan clarified gently. Based on the documented evidence of persistent parental neglect and the child's absolute best interests during this fragile period of grief, Alistair firmly believed, and I wholeheartedly concur, that a judge would likely award you temporary guardianship while a more permanent, comprehensive arrangement is legally determined. My hands began to tremble slightly again. The ultimate responsibility Alistair had entrusted to me was simply enormous. Not just documenting Seraphina's callous behavior, but potentially taking over Rhys's primary daily care for the foreseeable future. I'm 68 years old, Jonathan. Would a court really seriously consider me as a guardian over Rhys's own biological mother? Age is not inherently disqualifying, Eve, especially given your long-documented profound involvement in his life. And remember, we are not alleging Seraphina is an unfit mother in the traditional clinical sense. We are powerfully demonstrating that her current priorities and choices are unequivocally detrimental to Rhys's emotional and psychological well-being during this critical period of grief and adjustment. Jonathan then laid out the full body of evidence we had, meticulously accumulated my detailed, time-stamped journal documenting Seraphina's persistent absences and Rhys's heartbreaking reactions. The undeniable home security footage showing multiple concerning incidents, statements from Rhys's teachers about missed conferences and incomplete homework, notes from his grief counselor about documented regression and anxiety that precisely coincided with Seraphina's increased detachment, photographic evidence of the Miami trip with Thierry while Rhys was left with strangers, and now, the final damning document proposing to use Rhys as leverage. We'll need one more, absolutely critical piece, Jonathan explained, his voice returning to its professional pitch. A neutral, third-party psychological evaluation of Rhys's current home environment and emotional state. I've already arranged for a court-approved child psychologist to interview Rhys tomorrow at his school. This is standard procedure in these complex cases. Nothing that would immediately alarm Seraphina if she were to somehow hear about it. The methodical, terrifying way Alistair had prepared for this exact contingency, right down to identifying appropriate, court-approved psychological evaluators, broke my heart all over again. How long had he been deeply concerned about Seraphina's parenting? How much had he witnessed before concluding such drastic permanent measures might be necessary to save his son? When would we file the petition, Jonathan? I asked, trying desperately to focus on the practical, technical matters rather than my swirling, overwhelming emotions. Immediately after receiving the psychologist's official report, assuming it strongly supports our current position, likely within 48 hours. Jonathan's expression softened slightly, showing his concern. Eve, are you truly prepared for what inevitably comes next? Seraphina will not take this lying down. She'll be utterly furious, possibly vindictive and dangerous. I thought of Rhys's small, defeated face when he returned from Miami, the way he had confided that his mother had left him with strangers overnight, how he had clutched his father's photo while desperately trying not to cry. I thought of Alistair, who had foreseen this entire agonizing situation and trusted me to protect his son when he no longer physically could. I am prepared, I said firmly, the resolve hardening in my voice. What is our absolute next step? Maintain your current docile approach with Seraphina. Do not let on that anything has fundamentally changed. If she presses you for a final answer about her proposition, tell her you're still carefully considering it and have questions about some specific details. Jonathan began meticulously organizing the documents into a thick legal folder. Meanwhile, I will prepare the emergency petition and coordinate all details with the psychologist. As I left Jonathan's office, my phone buzzed instantly with a text message from Seraphina. Need your answer by tomorrow. Arizona arrangements pending. Important opportunity for Rhys's future. The transparent, desperate attempt to create artificial urgency only strengthened my steely resolve. I typed a carefully calibrated response. "Still reviewing, dear. Have some questions about the visitation schedule. Can we discuss tomorrow evening?" Her reply came back immediately. "Fine. 7:00 p.m. at the house. We'll have Thierry's attorney present to answer any concerns." Thierry's attorney, not Alistair's, not a neutral party, not even her own independent counsel. Another deeply telling detail for our documentation. I spent the afternoon with Rhys after school, helping with homework and listening as he reluctantly described an incident that morning when Seraphina had forgotten to pack his lunch, then harshly reprimanded him for calling to remind her because she was in an important business meeting. I recorded these details in my journal immediately after he went upstairs to play, noting his dejected posture and the way he had instinctively minimized his mother's harsh reaction, clearly accustomed to managing her volatile emotions rather than his own. That evening, I received an unexpected, crucial call from Jonathan. "The school psychologist met with Rhys today during lunch," he informed me without preamble. "Her preliminary findings are significant. Rhys demonstrated elevated, measurable anxiety when discussing his home environment, particular concern about being immediately sent away to Arizona, and a clear, profound attachment to you as his primary source of emotional stability and support." "Is that enough?" I asked, a cautious hope rising within me. "Combined with our other overwhelming evidence?" "Yes, Eve. I'm filing the emergency petition first thing tomorrow morning. The judge I've requested typically rules on these matters within 24 hours. Should I tell Rhys anything?" I worried about preparing him for the potential imminent upheaval. "Not yet," Jonathan advised firmly. "Children his age struggle with keeping sensitive, complex information private. For now, maintain all normal routines. If the judge rules in our favor, we'll have a child specialist help explain the situation to him appropriately and gently." I slept fitfully that night, torn between the desperate hope that Rhys might finally be protected from Seraphina's callous neglect and the paralyzing anxiety about the volcanic conflict that would inevitably erupt within hours. By morning, my resolve had hardened into unyielding steel. This wasn't about my preferences or even about honoring Alistair's exact wishes anymore. It was solely about a vulnerable child whose own mother was making selfish, dangerous choices that compounded rather than helped his profound grief. Jonathan called at 10:17 a.m. "The petition has been filed. Judge Carlton has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. Seraphina will be served notice this afternoon." So soon? I hadn't expected things to move with such terrifying speed. Judge Carlton takes child welfare cases extremely seriously, especially when there's evidence of potential parental flight risk. Seraphina's Arizona plans raised major red flags, just as Alistair anticipated. I instantly thought about my scheduled 7:00 p.m. meeting with Seraphina and Thierry's attorney that very evening. Should I still meet with Seraphina tonight as planned? "Absolutely not," Jonathan said firmly. "Once she has served the court papers, you should have no direct contact with her, for your own safety, except through legal representatives. Go to a hotel tonight if necessary. She'll likely be extremely volatile when she realizes what's happening." What about Rhys? Worry for my grandson overrode all other personal concerns. The petition includes a provision for Rhys to remain in his current home environment, with you present until the hearing. The server will explain that clearly to Seraphina. Thomas paused. "Eve, this is going to get complicated quickly. Are you absolutely fundamentally certain you're prepared for the fight of your life?" I thought of Alistair's letter, of his profound trust in me, of Rhys's increasingly anxious, pained behavior. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Jonathan." Seraphina's manipulative proposition becomes the final, irrefutable evidence we need. Immediately triggering Alistair's emergency protocol, a custody petition I never, in my worst nightmares, imagined filing. As court proceedings are set in motion with lightning speed, I prepare for the emotional storm that will erupt when Seraphina discovers her mercenary plans are being legally challenged. Jonathan warns me the battle will be vicious and personal, but my resolve is unshakable. For Alistair, for Rhys, I'll face whatever comes next, even as I wonder how my grieving grandson will weather this additional traumatic upheaval in his young life. "You scheming, manipulative witch." Seraphina's voice exploded through my phone hours after she had been served with the emergency custody petition. I held the device several inches away from my ear, her blinding rage so incandescent it seemed to physically radiate through the speaker. "How dare you try to steal my son after everything I've done for you? My attorneys will utterly destroy you. You'll never see Rhys again when this is over." Her words tumbled out in a continuous, furious, uncontrolled stream of venom. Following Jonathan's urgent advice, I remained rigidly silent, allowing her raw fury to spend itself without the oxygen of my engagement. Eventually, she seemed to register my complete lack of response. "Are you even there, Eve? Say something," she screamed into the phone. "On the advice of counsel, I cannot discuss this matter directly with you, Seraphina," I finally replied, keeping my voice absolutely calm and neutral, the voice of a professional, not a mother-in-law. "I'll see you at the hearing tomorrow morning. Good night. You'll regret this day for the rest of your life," she hissed before the line went dead with a deafening click. I leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, instantly exhausted. The court server had arrived at precisely 2:00 p.m., delivering the thick petition papers to Seraphina at her downtown office. Jonathan had wisely arranged for Rhys to be with me immediately after school, deliberately sparing him from witnessing his mother's inevitable volcanic explosion. Now, as evening approached, I faced the profound challenge of maintaining absolute normality for Rhys while mentally preparing for the intense, grueling hearing scheduled for tomorrow. He sat peacefully at the dining room table, completely focused on a math worksheet, blissfully unaware of the legal storm gathering with terrifying speed around him. "Grandma, can we please have spaghetti for dinner?" he asked, looking up from his multiplication problems. "The kind with your special sauce, please." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, profoundly grateful for the distraction of ordinary, essential tasks. "Would you like to help me make it?" As we chopped onions and stirred the rich sauce, I studied my grandson's small, vulnerable face, searching for any subtle signs of additional stress. Seraphina had called him earlier, her voice tight but artificially controlled, explaining that she had an unexpected, extremely urgent work emergency, and he would absolutely have to stay with me tonight. Rhys had accepted this flimsy explanation without question, sadly accustomed to his mother's frequent chaotic absences. "Mom sounded really mad on the phone," he observed suddenly, sprinkling a generous amount of grated cheese over his portion of spaghetti. "Is she mad at me?" "No, absolutely not, my love," I assured him quickly, fiercely. "Grown-ups sometimes get extremely frustrated about complex work things. It has nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with you." He nodded slowly, seeming relieved, but not entirely convinced. "She said she'd take me to get ice cream tomorrow to make up for missing our dinner," he added, a hint of deep disappointment in his voice. "But she forgot last time she promised that too." Another small, devastating piece of evidence, broken promises becoming so routine and habitual that an 8-year-old had already learned to expect profound disappointment from his own mother. I added these mental notes to my documentation while maintaining an encouraging, gentle expression. "Let's just enjoy our special dinner tonight, and we'll see what tomorrow brings," I suggested gently. I simply could not bring myself to make any promises about tomorrow, when I knew how completely our lives might be irrevocably changed after the crucial hearing. After putting Rhys to bed with extra stories and profound, quiet reassurance, I called Jonathan for final, technical preparation. "How's Rhys managing?" he asked immediately. "Managing," I replied truthfully, "unaware of what's happening as far as I can tell." Seraphina called him briefly, but kept her composure for his sake. "Good. Children are perceptive, but there's no need for him to shoulder adult concerns." Jonathan's voice took on its highly professional tone. "For tomorrow, I've prepared a comprehensive summary document of all evidence for Judge Carlton. The psychological evaluation came back strongly supportive of our position. Now, what exactly should I expect at the hearing?" I asked, trying to prepare myself mentally for the onslaught. "Judge Carlton runs a very tight courtroom. This is only a preliminary emergency hearing, so verbal testimony will be severely limited. You'll likely be asked only about your direct observations of Rhys's well-being and your demonstrated capacity to provide stable, temporary care. Seraphina will, of course, have ample opportunity to respond to all the allegations. Will Rhys need to appear? The thought of my grandson being questioned in a formal, intimidating court setting made my stomach clench with fear. No, Judge Carlton has carefully reviewed the psychologist's detailed report and specifically excluded Rhys from this initial emergency hearing. If a full long-term custody investigation proceeds, he may eventually speak with Rhys in his private chambers, but that would be weeks from now. I exhaled loudly in sheer relief. And Thierry Dubois, will he be involved? Legally, he has absolutely no standing. Practically, he's ruthlessly paying for Seraphina's high-powered attorney, Gerald Winters, so his pervasive influence will certainly be present. Jonathan paused again. Eve, prepare yourself fully. These hearings can get ugly, deeply personal. Seraphina's likely strategy will be to viciously paint you as a grief-deranged, controlling mother-in-law trying to steal her child for your own emotional fulfillment. I understand, I said, though my heart raced at the thought of public, false accusations. What matters is Rhys. Exactly. Focus on that tomorrow above all else. No matter what Seraphina or her attorney claim, remember why we are doing this in the first place. Sleep proved elusive that night. I checked on Rhys repeatedly, watching his peaceful, steady breathing and wondering how tomorrow's devastating decision would affect the rest of his fragile childhood. By morning, I was utterly exhausted, but resolute, dressed in a conservative navy suit that Jonathan had advised would convey stability and absolute trustworthiness to the court. "Why are you all dressed up, Grandma?" Rhys asked over breakfast, eyeing my unusual formal attire. "I have a very important meeting," I explained simply, helping him pack his backpack. "Mrs. Wilson from next door will take you to school today, and either Mom or I will pick you up this afternoon." He accepted this major change with the profound flexibility of childhood, more concerned about whether his favorite shirt was clean than about the day's unusual, chaotic arrangements. I hugged him extra tight at Mrs. Wilson's door, wishing I could physically shield him from the immense uncertainty ahead. The courthouse was imposingly formal, all cold marble and echoing silent hallways. Jonathan met me at the entrance, his expression professionally composed, but with deep worry lines visible around his eyes. Seraphina is already inside with her attorney, Gerald Winters from Mitchell and Blackwell, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the entire city, he whispered. I nodded, unsurprised that Thierry had secured top, ruthless legal representation. And our chances, Jonathan? Judge Carlton is fair but inherently cautious. The evidence is compelling, but temporary custody removal is still considered an extraordinary remedy. Jonathan squeezed my arm reassuringly. Remember, this isn't about winning or losing. Eve, it's about ensuring Rhys has proper, consistent support during a critical, dangerous time. Inside the courtroom, Seraphina sat at a long table with the sharp-featured Gerald Winters in an expensive suit. She wore a conservative black dress, her hair pulled back in a modest style that contrasted sharply with her usual fashionable appearance. The transformation into the grieving, devoted widow and mother was completely executed, right down to the framed photo of Alistair and Rhys she had placed prominently before her on the table. Her eyes met mine with a glacial, burning hatred as I entered, before she instantly adjusted her expression to one of profound, wounded confusion, leaning to whisper something urgent to her attorney. The final performance had begun. Judge Carlton, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, entered promptly at 9:00 a.m. Her no-nonsense demeanor suggested little patience for courtroom dramatics as she reviewed the thick file before her. This is an emergency hearing regarding temporary custody modification for minor child Rhys Alistair Reed, she stated, looking over her reading glasses at both tables. I've reviewed the petition and supporting documentation. Let's proceed efficiently, gentlemen and ladies. For the next hour, Jonathan presented our devastating case methodically, the documented patterns of neglect, Seraphina's increasing unexplained absences, the Miami trip incidents, the damning psychological evaluation, and finally, the damning proposition document showing Seraphina's explicit attempt to use Rhys as mercenary leverage. Gerald Winters countered with equal efficiency, portraying me as an interfering, grief-addled mother-in-law, ruthlessly exploiting a grieving widow's temporary struggles, suggesting my obsessive documentation demonstrated an unhealthy fixation, and painting Seraphina as a devoted mother temporarily overwhelmed by extraordinary tragic circumstances. Your Honor, Winters concluded smoothly, Mrs. Reed has kept her grandson overnight precisely 17 times since her son's death, at Mrs. Reed's specific request to help during this adjustment period. This does not demonstrate neglect. It shows a mother wisely accepting support while processing her deep grief. The Arizona opportunity represents a fresh, necessary start, not an abandonment of support systems. When my turn came to speak directly, I focused entirely on Rhys rather than Seraphina, describing concrete examples of his documented anxiety, his academic struggles since Alistair's death, and the absolute, unwavering stability I had attempted to provide. Your Honor, I said, meeting the judge's evaluating gaze directly, I am not seeking to replace Seraphina as Rhys's mother. I am simply asking for temporary, crucial measures to ensure his fundamental needs are prioritized during an exceptionally vulnerable, critical time in his young development. The overwhelming evidence suggests that currently, other priorities are tragically taking precedence over those essential needs. Judge Carlton asked pointed, penetrating questions of both sides, her expression revealing nothing of her ultimate thoughts. Finally, she announced she would review the full evidence in chambers and return with her final decision in 1 hour. The 60-minute wait in the courthouse hallway felt eternal. Seraphina and her attorney conferred in hushed, furious tones at one end, while Jonathan and I sat silently at the other. When the bailiff finally called us back in, my legs felt heavy as lead as I rose to hear the life-altering decision that would determine Rhys's immediate future. Judge Carlton wasted no time on preliminaries. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony presented, I find sufficient cause for emergency intervention in the current custody arrangement, she stated, her voice firm and authoritative. Temporary guardianship of minor child Rhys Alistair Reed is hereby granted to Dr. Evelyn Reed for a period of 60 days, during which a full, comprehensive evaluation of the family situation will be conducted by court-appointed specialists. I exhaled a shaky breath as she continued outlining the details. Seraphina would have supervised visitation 3 times weekly. Neither party could remove Rhys from the jurisdiction, and a comprehensive family assessment would begin immediately. Across the courtroom, Seraphina's composed facade cracked completely, her face contorted with pure fury as she instantly turned to her attorney, whisper shouting accusations and demands for an immediate appeal. Judge Carlton observed this devastating reaction with a raised eyebrow before adding a final, chilling comment. Miss Reed, your reaction to this temporary ruling deeply concerns me. I strongly advise you to use the coming evaluation period to demonstrate the mature parenting capacity your son desperately needs, rather than focusing solely on personal grievances. With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded, Court is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Seraphina instantly blocked our path, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with angry, hateful tears. This isn't over, she hissed, ignoring her attorney's restraining hand on her arm. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming next, you old fool. Jonathan immediately stepped between us. Miss Reed, all future communications must go through counsel from this point forward. We'll coordinate Rhys's pickup from school today and arrange the first supervised visitation. As Seraphina was finally led away by her increasingly concerned attorney, I leaned heavily against the cold marble wall, the sheer magnitude of what had just happened washing over me. I had temporary custody of my grandson. Alistair's desperate concerns had been vindicated by a court of law. Rhys would be protected, at least for now. What happens next, Jonathan? I asked, my voice barely steady. We pick up Rhys from school. Explain the situation as gently as possible, with the immediate help of his counselor, and begin establishing a stable, unwavering routine. He touched my shoulder supportively. The hardest part is just beginning, Eve. But for today, at least, Rhys is safe. Grandma, is Mom ever coming back to live here? Rhys's question pierced my heart yet again as we sat together on the porch swing, precisely 6 weeks after the emergency custody hearing. His small legs dangled, not quite reaching the floor, as he stared intently at the driveway where Seraphina's car would normally appear for her rigidly supervised visits. Visits she had attended only sporadically over the past month and a half. Your mom is going through a very difficult time, my love, I answered carefully, choosing the exact words the family therapist had suggested I use. She loves you very much, but sometimes adults struggle terribly with big, unexpected changes. Rhys nodded slowly, with a profound wisdom beyond his 8 years. Like when Daddy died and she started staying out late all the time. His quiet perception sometimes startled me with its devastating accuracy. Children notice so much more than we give them credit for. Something like that, my sweet, I agreed, pulling him closer into my side. How are you feeling about absolutely everything that's happened? He considered this question seriously, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sad sometimes, but not scared anymore, Grandma. Scared? I prompted gently. When Mom talked about Arizona and moving far away, I was really scared all the time, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to leave my school and my friends and especially you. And I didn't like Thierry. He always talked to me like I was a baby, or not even there at all. Each of these quiet, devastating revelations was meticulously noted in my ongoing documentation. The court-appointed evaluator had been meeting consistently with Rhys weekly and with me and Seraphina separately. The comprehensive assessment that Judge Carlton had ordered was nearing its crucial completion, with the final custody hearing scheduled for next week. The 6 weeks since gaining temporary guardianship had been both profoundly challenging and deeply healing. Rhys had initially been confused and upset when we first explained the new arrangement, but his counselor had expertly helped frame it as a special, important time with Grandma while Mom sorts out grown-up problems. The profound stability of routine, regular, nutritious meals, consistent bedtimes, dedicated homework help, and predictable expectations had gradually, demonstrably eased his deep anxiety. Seraphina's reaction to the new order had been volatile and completely erratic. She attended the first few supervised visits with palpable, obvious resentment, spending much of the time on her phone or asking Rhys loaded, manipulative questions about whether he was truly happy or if I was being mean to him. Then, she abruptly canceled 2 visits in a row, claiming work emergencies. When she did return, her approach had shifted sharply to bringing expensive, elaborate gifts and making wild, unrealistic promises about future trips and experiences. The most telling, damaging visit had been precisely 3 weeks ago when she arrived with Thierry Dubois unexpectedly in tow, brazenly attempting to circumvent the court order specifying who could be present. When the visitation supervisor firmly refused to allow Thierry to join, Seraphina had stormed out immediately, leaving Rhys in floods of tears. And without the crucial visit, he had been eagerly anticipating all week. She hadn't come for the past 2 scheduled visits at all. Do you think you'll feel ready for the talk with the judge next week, my dear? I asked Rhys, referring to the in-camera conversation that Judge Carlton had scheduled. The therapist had been carefully preparing him, explaining that the judge simply wanted to hear his thoughts and feelings, not force him to make the agonizing choice between his mother and grandmother. I guess so, he replied, kicking his feet rhythmically against the swing. Miss Abernathy said I just have to tell the truth about what makes me feel safe and happy. That's exactly right, my love, I assured him, though my own stomach knotted with fear at the thought of Rhys facing such immense adult responsibilities. The next day brought an unexpected, deeply alarming development. Jonathan called early in the morning, his usually measured professional tone edged with raw urgency. Eve, Seraphina's attorney just filed a motion to dismiss the custody case. My hand instantly tightened on the phone. On what grounds, Jonathan? They're claiming the evidence was completely manufactured. That you manipulated Rhys into making false statements against his mother, and that Seraphina's parenting decisions were reasonable, temporary responses to overwhelming grief. My heart sank instantly. Do they have any chance of succeeding, Jonathan? Ordinarily, I would say absolutely not. Our documentation is too thorough, the psychological evaluation is too clear and compelling. Jonathan paused heavily. But there's a serious complication. Thierry Dubois has powerful political connections with Judge Blackwell, who's been unexpectedly assigned to hear this motion while Judge Carlton is on medical leave. The terrifying implications were chillingly clear. Money, power, and political influence could potentially override weeks of careful evidence gathering and professional evaluations. What can we possibly do, Jonathan? I asked, trying desperately to keep the sheer panic from my voice. I'm filing counter-motions immediately. But Eve, there's something else you absolutely must know. Our investigator reports that Seraphina and Thierry have put significant deposits on property in the Dominican Republic, a jurisdiction with severely limited enforcement of U.S. custody orders. The underlying threat crystallized with horrifying final clarity. If Seraphina regained custody, even temporarily, she could potentially take Rhys out of the country to a place where our legal protections would be virtually impossible to enforce. She wouldn't, I began, then instantly stopped myself. Of course she would. Everything I'd painfully learned about Seraphina in these harrowing weeks confirmed she viewed Rhys primarily as an accessory to the lucrative life she craved. We have to move faster than they are. Eve, this motion to dismiss is a clear distraction, designed to buy them the precious time they need to execute their Dominican Republic flight plan. Jonathan's voice was sharp with a new sense of desperate urgency. I was back in his office, feeling the immense weight of the situation pressing down on my chest. What is our ultimate move, Jonathan? We can't let her take him, not to Thierry. We're filing a motion for injunctive relief, a request to the court to specifically block Rhys's passport and issue an immediate travel restriction, citing Seraphina's documented flight risk and the purchase of property in a non-extradition zone. But that requires a fast, definitive hearing. He handed me a large, glossy photograph. It was a picture of Seraphina and Thierry standing together, smiling broadly, holding what looked like a signed contract for a massive villa overlooking the ocean. The photo was dated just 3 days ago. This is the proof, Eve. This proves her intent to flee the jurisdiction. I looked at the picture of my daughter-in-law, her face radiant not with love, but with mercenary ambition. The sheer depth of her self-interest was a psychological case study in pathological narcissism. How did Alistair ever marry her, Jonathan? I whispered, the old pain returning. She was a master performer, Eve, and Alistair was fiercely loyal. He gave her every chance to be the mother Rhys deserved. The hearing for the motion to dismiss was scheduled before Judge Blackwell in 2 days. The travel restriction hearing was scheduled simultaneously. We were effectively fighting 2 battles at once, one based on the merits of the case, Rhys's welfare, and one based on the imminent danger, Seraphina's flight, risk. Judge Blackwell is known for siding with the biological parent, unless the neglect is egregious, Jonathan reminded me, his voice cautious. Winters will argue that your evidence of neglect is just normal marital stress, and that I am simply a disgruntled family friend. And I will be there to show the court that I am a doctor of psychology who has documented cold. Clinical abandonment, I stated, the old academic steel returning to my voice. I am not just a family friend, Jonathan. I am the stable, permanent caregiver my son fought to put in place. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal preparation. I reviewed my journal entries, preparing for the inevitable cross-examination. I focused on the concrete, undeniable facts. The asthma incident, the lost science project, the 17 broken promises, the 2 nights Rhys was left with a sleeping stranger. On the morning of the hearing, I left Rhys with Mrs. Wilson, giving him a kiss that felt like a silent, desperate prayer. The atmosphere in Judge Blackwell's courtroom was noticeably different from Judge Carlton's. It was colder, more formal, and the judge himself, a man in his late 50s with an air of professional aloofness, seemed less concerned with the emotional aspects of the case. Winters, Seraphina's attorney, launched his attack immediately, his voice booming with false indignation. Your Honor, this is a clear case of an interfering grandmother attempting a hostile takeover of a child's life. Dr. Reed has weaponized her son's tragic death and used her professional training to manipulate a grieving 8-year-old into making claims against his mother for financial gain. He then cross-examined me, focusing on my credentials. Dr. Reed, you are a retired psychologist, not a child welfare specialist, correct? I am a psychologist, licensed in this state for 35 years, and I specialize in family dynamics and child attachment theory, I corrected firmly. But you are not Rhys's biological mother, nor were you his primary caregiver before his father's death, correct? I was his consistent, reliable caregiver, which is what the evidence shows he desperately needs now. The battle raged fiercely, each side trading blows that were personal and deeply painful. Seraphina sat beside Winters, playing the role of the distraught victim, occasionally dabbing her dry eyes, but her gaze towards me held nothing but a promise of future retribution. When it was Jonathan's turn, he hit back hard, focusing entirely on the flight risk. Your Honor, we are not simply asking for custody. We are asking the court to prevent an international parental kidnapping. We have documented evidence of the mother's intent to permanently remove the child from the country to a non-extradition zone, specifically the Dominican Republic, with a partner who has zero legal standing and a clear financial motive to flee the country. He then presented the photograph and the documentation of the property deposit. The air in the courtroom changed instantly. Judge Blackwell's aloof facade broke, replaced by a deep frown. Intent to flee was a game changer. Winters immediately objected, calling the evidence unverified tabloid nonsense. But the damage was done. When Judge Blackwell finally spoke, his voice was measured, but his authority was absolute. The motion to dismiss is denied. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. However, he continued, turning to the travel restrictions, due to the immediate, documented risk of international flight, the temporary custody order granting guardianship to Dr. Evelyn Reed is hereby affirmed and immediately extended until the final custody hearing. Furthermore, the court issues an immediate order of neexiat, restricting the minor child's travel outside the state, and ordering the immediate surrender of the minor child's passport to the court clerk. Seraphina's face turned ashen. She had lost the battle to reclaim immediate custody, and she had lost the ability to flee the country. The Dominican Republic plan had been decisively crushed. As she was being led away by Winters, she screamed a final, desperate threat that echoed throughout the marble hall. You will regret this. You have no idea what real pain is. I left the courthouse that day feeling an immense sense of protective triumph, but also a deep sense of dread. Seraphina had been cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind of all. The final hearing was still weeks away, but the legal groundwork was complete. Alistair's foresight had prevailed. Now, I just had to survive the inevitable final counterattack. The 2 weeks following Judge Blackwell's ruling were marked by a tense, fragile peace. The travel restrictions meant Seraphina was confined to the state, and her supervised visits with Rhys became even more sporadic and performative. Rhys, now free from the constant fear of being suddenly whisked away, began to truly blossom. He was excelling in his studies, the anxiety in his counselor's notes was diminishing, and his laughter had returned, genuine, unburdened laughter that was music to my soul. Dr. Evelyn Reed focused entirely on providing the safe, predictable routine that Alistair had always intended. I baked the banana pancakes every Saturday. We worked on a new, successful science project, and we spent hours talking about Alistair, weaving his memory into the fabric of our new life. The final custody hearing was scheduled for the first Monday of the next month. Jonathan assured me that with the evidence of flight risk, the strong psychological reports, and my proven capacity as a stable caregiver, we were overwhelmingly likely to win primary legal and physical custody, with Seraphina retaining supervised visitation rights. She has no move left, Eve, Jonathan had concluded during our last meeting. She's out of resources and she's out of runway. The court sees her clear priorities, and they are not Rhys. But I knew Seraphina. I knew her kind of narcissism did not allow for simple defeat. Her last, desperate, chaotic act was coming. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Rhys was home from school, happily building a massive fort in the living room. My phone buzzed with an alert from the security system, a generic notification from the front door. I ignored it, assuming it was a delivery. But a minute later, the doorbell chimed insistently, followed by a loud, desperate banging. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It wasn't Seraphina. It was Thierry Dubois. He looked disheveled, frantic, and completely unlike the arrogant man I had met at the funeral. I did not open the door. "Go away, Thierry," I said firmly, my voice muffled by the thick wood. "You are not permitted on this property. Dr. Reed, please." "You have to listen to me. It's not about Rhys. It's about Alistair. Seraphina is gone and she took everything." I froze, my hand hovering over the lock. "Seraphina is under a travel restriction. She can't leave the state." "She left me, doctor. She took the money, all of it. The investment portfolio, the insurance money. She sold the condo 2 weeks ago, claiming she was going to pay off her attorney, but she liquidated everything and vanished." His voice cracked with genuine raw panic. "I was the fool, Dr. Reed. She was manipulating me too. She never intended to go to the Dominican Republic with me. She bought the property deposit just to make me believe the plan was on track." I checked the accounts. She wired the entire sum to a numbered account in the Seychelles yesterday. "She used me and she used Alistair's money to run." He leaned against the door, his confession a torrent of rage and humiliation. Alistair knew. Alistair found out about the money being siphoned off. That's why he changed the will. He was protecting Rhys from her financial predation, not just her neglect. He confronted her 4 months ago. She admitted to me she put a slow-acting poison in his vitamin supplements. She was trying to delay the final confrontation, to buy herself time to drain the rest of his accounts before his lawyer could finalize everything. The aneurysm. It was a cover. The world went silent. Alistair's sudden death, the massive aneurysm, the unthinkable, was not a natural event. It was a cold, calculated murder. I staggered back, the cold marble hallway swirling around me. The pieces slammed into place. The 4-month will change, the stress, the diminished capacity claim Seraphina almost used, the speed of his death. Seraphina had not merely neglected her son. She had murdered her husband to secure his assets, and when that failed, she used her son as a human shield. I have the evidence. The bank transfers. The text where she confesses to me. She was going to dump Rhys on me once she got to the Seychelles. Thierry pleaded, his voice desperate. I was her accomplice. "Please, Dr. Reed, I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything. I need her stopped. She ruined my life." I looked through the peephole one last time. He wasn't the enemy anymore. He was merely another victim, a pawn in Seraphina's final ruthless game. But I had to protect Rhys. "Call Jonathan Price," I said, my voice utterly devoid of emotion, the voice of a professional who had just witnessed the final, horrific piece of evidence. "Go to his office now. Tell him everything. I will handle Rhys." I watched Thierry run off toward his car, clutching the evidence that would finally bring justice for Alistair. I closed the door, leaned against it, and inhaled slowly. Seraphina had escaped the custody battle, but she had not escaped justice. She had simply delayed it, paying the ultimate price by confessing her crime to the one person who could bring her down. I walked into the living room, where Rhys was happily playing inside his blanket fort. He looked up at me, his eyes full of the simple, unblemished light of childhood. "Grandma Eve, can you help me find the flashlight? It's dark in here." I smiled, my heart aching with the immense weight of the truth, but feeling a profound, unshakable peace. Alistair was gone, but his love, the immense, foresightful love that had saved his son, remained. "Of course, my love," I said, kneeling down, the scent of fresh laundry and old memory surrounding us. "I'll help you. I'm right here." The court victory brought temporary peace. But the price of cornering Seraphina was a final, devastating blow I never saw coming. The realization that my son was not a victim of fate, but of calculated, cold-blooded murder. The insidious nature of the betrayal was a chilling confirmation that true evil often wears the most beautiful mask. Seraphina escaped the custody trial, but her final, desperate confession to her lover became the damning evidence that secured her ultimate downfall, and finally justice for Alistair. If this story of forensic psychology, overwhelming betrayal, and a mother's relentless love has moved you, please join our community. Hit the subscribe button and share this video to honor Alistair's memory and remind the world that light will always expose darkness. Always fight for the truth, for your family, and never underestimate the power of a determined grandmother.